British food is about more than what we put on our plates. Our landscape, our climate and our history define what we grow and where we grow it.
This is the mustard that built empires.
Each place, each region, each food has its own story to tell.
And does it make them more delicious if they're smaller?
I think they're sweeter tasting, yes.
I'm exploring Britain to discover how our soils and seas have shaped our tastes and traditions, because our food is who we are.
So if we carry on in this direction, do we have to shout something before we go?
Alongside me on this journey are horticulturalist Alice Fowler, botanist James Wan.
Look at that! I've never seen that much essential oil. We will build in this tank so that we get, 40 litres or so. Wow!
Archaeologist Alex Langlands and historian Lucy Worsley.
We've been eating turkey for Christmas since the 1500s. And it's surprising, seeing as they actually come from Mexico.
This is the story of our food. This time we're in North Wales, a raw elemental landscape defined by nature. And I'm exploring it in the footsteps of the drovers, remarkable men who once walked livestock hundreds of miles to market.
An odd thing, when I was preparing to come up here to follow the route of the drovers, I was with my wife at my mother-in-law's house, and she said, my family were drovers, my great-great-great-grandfather was a drover, and she went upstairs and got this photo, and it shows 4 drovers, and the one on the far left of the brothers is Daniel Jones, her great-great-great-great-grandfather, and thus my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather-in-law. It mightn't sound like much, but it connects me to these strange, mysterious people. I'm going to try and pick up the route of the drovers to find out just exactly what these forgotten fellows actually did. I'm going to be travelling right across North Wales, through rugged terrain that can only be harnessed by sheer hard graft, using some of the droving tracks that crisscross the country. My journey begins in the far west, meeting the animals that were once at the centre of the droving trade. I'm starting on the island of Anglesey, just off the coast of North Wales. Farmer Brian Thomas is taking me to see his pedigree herd of Welsh black cattle. We're safe, are we, as long as we're in the land?
Welsh blacks have been farmed out on these hills since before records began. How long before, we don't know.
They look incredibly sweet and fluffy and furry.
These are the breeding stock. As you can see now, they've got very good coats on them. They're tough and hardy.
Their hardiness has presumably been developed over time because of the, you'll forgive me, incredibly harsh conditions in this part of the country.
We get lots of wind and rain here, and that's why the breeders developed they've actually got very, very thick hides on them compared to the continental breeds of cattle. I've seen cattle with icicles hanging down their bellies and things like that.
These ones?
Yeah,
really?
Well, they survive fine.
Brian's family have been farming this herd for more than 80 years. His father and grandfather bred prize-winning bulls and developed their own bloodline.
They don't have names, do they? There's too many of them.
Yes, all the cows have got names.
Have they?
Pedigree, yeah.
They're all Gladys, presumably, are they?
No, there's a lot of Mariannes and Blodwens.
And Bronwyn?
No, we haven't got a Bronwyn. We've got Brendas, Princesses.
So these are pretty independent. They don't really need you at all?
No, very little.
You just come out here and drive around in circles sometimes and they...
I just check they're all right, there's nothing ill, and which is very, very rarely happens.
This is Brian's breeding herd. The next field over has the cattle that are ready for market, his store cattle. Today he's bringing them into the farm for an inspection. Brian has several hundred Welsh blacks, whose predecessors, the original farmers of North Wales, would have had only a handful.
I mean, I know that technically they don't stampede, but they're all coming this way. And I'm just going to be up here. I'll just be behind this bush, should you need me for anything.
Before road, rail and supermarkets, farmers would sell their cattle to drovers, who would then walk them to market. They covered huge distances, some even going as far as the greatest meat market of them all, London Smithfield.
Well, what does it feel like to be walking after cattle then?
It's good, it's fine. We can go all the way to London, no problem. How far is it from here?
About 250 miles, I think.
For Welsh farmers, these were quite literally cash cows. They were a currency to be traded. The English upper and middle classes feasted on Welsh beef, but for farmers the meat was money in their pocket, rather than food on the table.
So if you had to drive cattle to London, would you choose these?
Oh, definitely, for a number of reasons. A, they're very, very quiet, as you can see, compared to some of the...
Yeah, almost no chat at all, I've noticed.
And also that, if you look at them, they've got good, strong bones, which would be fit for good for walking. They're fit cattle.
As much as I'd love to drove these cattle all the way to London, Brian only walks them from the field down this lane to the farm. Modern regulations mean any movement beyond the farm needs licences and big cattle trucks.
Here we are, London.
Brian farms the cattle with his father, Owen Gwilym, and his son, Carwan. And it's all about getting the cattle into the best condition.
Put your hand on the line there. Yeah. You left. Better meat.
So that's got better meat, is it?
I don't think it's got as much covering on the ribs myself as the other one. I'm talking about the loin now. Yeah.
Wait a minute, so you're saying that this animal here has a good loin, but the one over here has better ribs?
Yeah. This carcass will be heavier than that one. High time this went now. If you left this for another month, it might just go over the top.
And what, start shrinking?
No, getting a bit too fat.
Getting too fat?
Yeah.
Brian and his father need to judge when the cattle are ready to go to market, but not all of them will go to auction.
Where are these likely to go?
These are all going through my own meat business. They'll be either going to the farmer's market or to the shop in Beaumaris, or they'll be eaten in the restaurant.
So you have your own restaurant serving your own beef?
I have our own restaurant serving their own beef.
Producing Welsh Blacks used to be all about getting your meat taken huge distances to market. But today, what sells is eating local. Brian's butchery and restaurant is just a few miles from the fields where the cattle are fattened up.
It's true, you are also a butcher.
Although being the farmer, the butcher and employing the chef has to be pretty unusual.
I was basically feeling that.
You're feeling it from that angle there.
And so I could feel that, and I could feel that was in good condition. What would it have looked like if it hadn't been in such good condition?
Well, there wouldn't be the fat cover that's on that to start off with, and also the muscle wouldn't be nearly as thick. And if you haven't got the fat, it wouldn't have the marbling, so it would eat tough.
Cattle that were walked to the hungry English cities were fattened on the way. The lusher grasses of the Midlands and the South provided the final ingredient on their journey to market. Now, with some clever farming, Brian can deliver this kind of taste locally.
That's amazing. So walking around in the field with the cows and just seeing all that grass that they're eating, you become very aware that it's an animal, it's just a machine to turn the grass into something that we can eat. I'm almost imagining that slightly acidic Welsh soil actually gets through the grass into the...
But we're also high mineral soil in Anglesey. The Roman times, the biggest copper mines in the world were on the island.
Amazing to think the Romans ate these steaks. I'm sorry, Brian, you're hot standing there with your knife and fork and I'm not letting you near it, but I guess you've eaten plenty of this stuff.
I need to prepare myself for the long journey ahead. Welsh Blacks are hardy, and they need to be. The North Wales landscape is full of challenges. To you and me, the mountains of Snowdonia look beautiful, but historically they were harsh, unruly unforgiving places. It's hard to grow anything here, but in the far northeast, the mountains briefly fall away to reveal a precious oasis of rich soil. Botanist James Wan is discovering the roots of a very traditional Welsh crop.
What would the Welsh choose to grow in their prime bit of agricultural land? Well, it's the leek, of course. Thousands of them. And the incredible thing is that you never notice in the supermarkets is this amazing kind of powdery steel blue as far as the eye can see. Almost kind of exotic looking. Despite it being a Welsh icon, the botany, the origin of the leek, is still a little bit of a mystery. There is a native plant from which the species is derived that does grow in Wales and the southwest of England and right across the Mediterranean. But there's an alternate theory that the Romans introduced it.
The humble leek has been part of the Welsh diet for thousands of years. They were grown here on every small holding and in every garden. A hearty winter food with a distinctive flavour.
The first thing you notice when you slice into one of these little guys is that really pungent sort of sulphury smell, and that's made by sulfur compounds that are found in everything in the allium family, the onion family, so onions, shallots, garlic, etc. It's a chemical called allicin, which is developed in the plant as a kind of internal insecticide. It's also antibacterial and antifungal, kind of like a part security system to ensure it doesn't get attacked by things.
To be farmed on any kind of scale, leeks need fertile, well-drained soil. Until recently, Wales had to import commercially grown leeks from England and Holland. Charlie Lightbound, though, brought Welsh leeks home.
How many acres have you got here?
Got about 400 acres altogether.
So, this area of Wales, is this one of the best places to grow leeks in the country?
Yes, Wales has got an awful lot of agricultural land, as you've seen, but there's probably only 2% of it that's grade 1 or grade 2. And you need grade 1, grade 2 land to grow vegetables, and especially leeks. They're very thirsty and very hungry crop.
So presumably these are quite small pockets of land, 50 miles away. Could you grow a crop like this necessarily?
No. 15 miles away you can grow a crop like this. If you look over there, you're up the top of a hill.
Leeks are as embedded in Welsh history as they are in the soil. The association is thought to have started with St David, who is said to have lived on bread, water and leeks alone in the 6th century. From this came stories of them being worn into battle against the Saxons and even the French. Now they're a symbol of St David's Day, not just a vegetable, a source of Welsh pride.
What we've got here are what we call our really Welsh leeks. Those are the ones that we sell in Wales. We sell them through Welsh stores.
And what about the other Union Jack?
Union Jacks that are sold throughout the rest of the UK.
And it's the same product, just packaged differently.
On the Welsh, we allow just a little bit more flag. There are a few traditional Welsh leek recipes that call for the use of more of the flag, so more of this part of the leek.
So when you say the flag, you mean this green section here, the extra section of leek?
Exactly.
Oh, really? So there's a consumer difference between in Wales and the rest of the UK?
That's right, yeah.
This is leek farming on an industrial scale. The harvester can process up to 7 tons of leeks a day. It moves across the fields following the workers as they cut the crop. Leeks are trimmed, washed, sorted and packed all on the move. Supermarkets have notoriously exacting standards.
If you look at that one,
Yeah.
that's bent. If you look at this one, it's too thin.
Have you got some ones here that are kind of quirky shapes? Presumably these don't make it very.
They'd be difficult for our customers to put in their shopping basket.
Yeah.
They will either go and be sold for processing, or they will be put into the discounted ranges.
So it's not only about washing and cutting and selecting to make them perfect. Presumably it's right down from when you sow the seed. It's about getting the right variety.
What we want is a uniform crop. It becomes so much faster and so much more economic.
Oats were once a subsistence staple. Now they're a 21st century crop. In this field, Charlie is trialling over 200 different varieties to try to find the perfect range of supermarket leeks.
This is the future of leek growing what we're standing in.
It is.
I can't tell the difference between any of them.
They all have different characteristics in terms of disease resistance, their growth habits, and the time of year we want to harvest them. Number 237 here, this is much more of a blue-green than, say, this one. If you have them alongside each other.
Oh, wow.
And what we find with these blue-green varieties is they go through the winter a lot better. If we're going to have more really cold winters like we had last winter, we've got to start looking for varieties that'll withstand the cold temperatures.
Fantastic. So what else are you selecting?
So different varieties for different end customers. So for pre-packaged leeks, pre-packed leeks where we don't want any leaf at all, we want a really long shank.
So like if you get one of those multi-buy packs, it's a different genetic variety for buying individual leeks.
Yes.
That's so cool.
On Anglesey, I'm picking up the trail of the drovers and their prized Welsh black cattle. The movement of meat on the hoof is centuries old. As cities grew, so did the trade.
These cattle over here, they're being drove, don't they? Look at them, they've been walking on a perfect line.
They know one another, you see.
Reverend Emmeline Richards has been researching the Anglesey droves for years. Farmers would hand their animals over to skilled drovers who'd bring the herd together in lanes like these. Cattle would join in their ones and twos, however many needed to be sold that year.
All the little lanes and roads in those days were very, very narrow. Just the width of a cart and a horse. Mm-hmm. But this is different altogether.
This is wider.
Yes, much, much wider.
And you brought the cattle in here, but why?
Oh yes, to bring them together. Otherwise, they'd be fooling around.
Because they didn't know each other.
They didn't know one another. They'd be afraid of one another. If you keep them together in here, they soon become friends.
It's like a departure now.
Yes, to get them ready for the journey. But to a drover, every phase here would mean something.
Can you do that? This one with the white face right in the middle, I would say she's pretty mean. Is that fair?
Well, that could be.
Whereas this one coming through is the boss, surely.
But they would know the nature of every one of them, you know. It was a very special relationship between man and an animal.
Once the cattle were gathered, the drovers would head to the Menai Strait, the stretch of tidal water that makes Anglesey an island. The Reverend's brother Harry joins us as we reach this rather significant hurdle.
And supposing this were a couple of hundred years ago and we were driving our cattle here, there was no bridge. I mean, this is Victoria.
Oh yes, there wasn't a bridge until 1826, you see. And when you think of it, there could be anything between 300 and 400 cattle.
So we've got all these cattle and we've driven them all the way to here, then we have to get them onto the mainland. So how do we do that?
Cattle are afraid of anything strange. And to them, this vast water will be a cause of a fright for them. The boatmen will be here, ready, you see, to start them.
The boatmen, so they put the cattle on boats?
No, the boats were looking after them, to guide them over.
And how deep is it?
Oh, it's very, very deep.
So the cattle don't walk, they swim?
Goodness me, no.
So basically they look like ducks with horns?
Yes, quite true, quite true.
If it wasn't for a reverend telling me, I think I'd find it hard to believe that cattle actually swam to the other side. The drovers had songs for their epic journeys, songs and stories that are kept alive by people like the Reverend and Harry.
Fe gerddais lawer milltir yng ngres yr haf a'r thw. Ar hyfedd y ddylanwad a reidion gwyllt a byw.
Yeah, it's not actually as hard as I thought it would be to imagine how it looked. The noise and the shouting and the people singing like this, you know, to keep themselves entertained, drown out the apparently miserable sound of these lowing animals, just sort of heading off into the unknown for months and months and months.
Roi gyrraedd gwertheg ffeiriau yn nabod tŵn dy lais, yn nabod tŵn dy lais, yn nabod tŵn dy lais. Roi gyrraedd gwertheg yn nabod tŵn dy lais.
The Menai Strait was the first big challenge for the drovers on their journey east. This stretch of water is famous for its ever-changing and often treacherous tidal currents. At the eastern end, near Beaumaris, the strait opens out. Before I head any further on my journey, I'm stopping off to take a closer look.
This dramatic, melancholy, rather beautiful scene, the fast-flowing grey waters of the Menai Straits, the rain lashing down on a fast-disappearing Snowdon on the Welsh mainland, is a scene that has remained more or less unchanged for thousands of years, barring the odd bright orange buoy, the odd house, the odd pylon. What has changed is what lies beneath the surface, which is one of Wales's newest pieces of farmland. But to see it properly, we'll have to wait till the tide goes out.
The coasts around North Wales are rich in shellfish. Cockles, mussels and oysters are amongst our truly indigenous and ancient foods, and they've been harvested by locals for centuries. Traditionally, they were raked by hand, hard, back-breaking work for little return. But a group of enterprising fishermen thought there had to be a better way. They decided to supplement nature's harvest and start farming shellfish. The result? The UK's biggest mussel farm, where a staggering 3/4 of our farmed mussels come from. Not that you'd ever know it.
Where we're standing now on a normal tide, it's about, the height of the tide would be about 3 metres underneath water.
Really? That's an enormous amount of water to go out and in.
James Wilson doesn't often visit his farm by foot. 15 minutes of trudging across muddy sand, and I still haven't seen a mussel.
It's amazing. I've never sort of stood in a place like this. It's like the sea disappears and it's just a whole land mass has appeared out of nowhere.
This is the great expanse of lava and sand.
Is there anything about the tides that makes it particularly good for your purposes?
It's got enough flow of water over it, so there's a lot of food coming in, but it's not too much so that they get dislodged and pushed away. It's a fantastic place to grow mussels.
It takes another 15 minutes of walking, but suddenly we reach the first mussels.
Hordes of mussels,
yeah.
like the armies of Genghis Khan across the plains of Mongolia. A bit
slightly less effective and not so bloodthirsty.
And more fishy, but yeah.
To the untrained eye, this might look like a natural mussel bed, but these fishy hordes have actually been brought here as seed mussels by James and his team. The farm is divided into 3 zones, each one further from the shore. The first area we reach is the nursery, where the youngest mussels are left to toughen up.
They grow really, really fast, actually. So in the first year, they'll probably grow, that's 30 millimetres in size.
And you could eat it now?
Well, I mean, the legal minimum size is 45 millimetres.
Right.
Which is so another third bigger than that one now. So to get that third extra in size, that'll probably take another year.
Right.
We have them here really just to get them used to being exposed to the air, makes them stronger, and they grow a harder shell.
Some farmed mussels are grown on ropes, but all these need is the seabed, which I'm slowly sinking into.
What a mussel does is a filter feeder. So it filters stuff out of the water column, some of which it can eat, some of which it can't. And the stuff it can't eat, it basically excretes out.
Right.
And that's what this is. The kilo of mussel will produce about 17 kilos of fecal matter a year. It puts everything into...
Hey!
Yeah, that could have been worse, I think.
Do you think?
Yeah.
You pull me out of there. I've been walking for half an hour to get out to these mussels, and now I'm going to spend the rest of my life here with them. Wait, there's some movement. There's some movement.
I'm getting stuck now.
Oh. It's the most dangerous kind of farming I've ever known. I would rather fish for shark.
This is ridiculous.
You know?
James isn't deterred, and once I'm free, makes me walk even further from the safety of the shoreline. The mussels from the nursery area are moved here by boat when their shells have hardened up.
Yeah, we're in the intertidal subtidal boundary now, so the mussels are underneath the water for slightly longer. If you feel those, I mean, they feel solid but a bit light. And then if you feel these ones now, this is after they're considerably heavier and considerably more solid.
And these are these fellows here?
Yeah, we hold them here for about a year.
For the last stage, the mussels are moved beyond the reach of the tides. Submerged all the time, they feed constantly in the rich waters of the Menai Strait.
So those mussels are safe from us for another day? They'll be safe from us until we're on the boat, of course, in which case and when we can just get them. They're not safe from me ever.
James's boat is one of a small fleet that can harvest 11,000 tons of mussels a year. The dredger has a shallow draft, so she can float serenely over the mussel beds I've just been falling over in.
Everyone takes their shoes off in here. I'm sorry, that's very Japanese of you.
The job today is to relay mussels in the deepest beds for the final fattening up stage. Fishing by dredging has a terrible name for destroying the fragile ocean bed. The idea here is that they slice through the mussel mud, leaving the seabed underneath untouched. And as they scoop up the mussels, much of that sludge gets washed away in the current.
We're as natural as we can be. You know, the only thing that we're doing is moving the animals themselves around into different parts of the seabed.
You're doing what mussels would do themselves if they had legs?
I suppose so.
And you're just giving them a little wash there, right?
A little wash to get off some of the...
Really? Look at that. It's like a car wash.
I'm not sure I'm cut out to be a mussel farmer, but I do know how to eat them.
Where can I buy these?
Well, unfortunately, you can't buy them in this country. Certainly not...
You what?
I know, it's crazy, isn't it?
James can't find a market in British supermarkets, so he sells to the Dutch who supply shops across Europe.
You know, I'd like to sell mussels not just locally in North Wales or within Wales, but throughout the whole of the UK. I think it would be a brilliant thing to do.
It's really strange because this whole story has been to me really nice and local and sustainable, and it's us and your precision. It's here and it's in Wales and it's all great and making the most of our natural resources. And then we're having to selling them, they're going abroad.
When I have talked to buyers in supermarket chains, and they say, "Oh, dredge mussels, I don't want to eat them; they're gritty." And you know, they do live in mud, but they're used to being clean. So I mean, perhaps you can tell me, gritty?
Amazing. Yeah, they're like butter.
While James and I polish off the Moule Marinière, the boat is still relentlessly lifting their younger brethren into the dredger.
What the difference in colour? Yeah, different sexes.
So that's very orange. What colour? What sex is that?
That's the female, and the paler one's a male.
Now the dredged mussels are flushed out of the ship to settle in their new home. In a few months, all plump and succulent, they'll be harvested and sent off to the lucky old Dutch. It's time to leave the boat and continue my droving journey into the mountains. In North Wales, persistence is what counts. Persistence to produce food in a landscape full of challenges. Historian Lucy Worsley has headed east to the Welsh borders in search of an exotic crop with its roots in the past.
The local baker, Wyn Roberts, has been making something special for me, something you wouldn't expect to find in Wales. Hi there, Wynne.
Hi.
So, this is what I've come to see. How would you describe the scent of it then? What's it like?
Like a sweet, come sour, earthy.
So it's quite hard to categorise, isn't it?
Very hard.
There's also something a bit rough and wild about it. We're making buns with saffron, the most expensive spice in the world. Oops. Do you know, it was really, really common in medieval and Tudor diets. They loved it.
What's that?
Believe it or not, this saffron was grown just up the road from here, in Wales. It's a spice we associate with exotic foreign places, but actually it has a long British history. Why does this feel rude? England was once a major grower of saffron, and entire towns made their name from it. By the 16th century, Chipping Walden in Essex was so famous for the spice that it became known as Saffron Walden. Look at these lovely buns! It's a spice whose taste nearly defies description.
There's an aftertaste on it.
Yeah, definitely. There's something exotic about it. Very nice indeed. Autumn crocuses hold the secret of saffron.
They've been cultivated by humans for 5,000 years.
And the only reason they're growing in this corner of North Wales is Caroline Wyden. What's the correct picking technique?
Well, you want to go as far down the stem as you can, not picking a leaf.
Like
that? Yeah, that's right.
So those are 3 red stigmas, female organs of the plant, the bit we want, and the yellow stamens, male part of the plant.
That's right.
We don't want.
Yeah.
Saffron is the product not of nature, but of thousands of years of hard work. The crocuses have been so extensively bred for their stigmas that they're now sterile. They can't reproduce without our help.
It may have come over with the Romans. They introduced so many things, didn't they? But because saffron is human dependent, the saffron dies out in the land and it has to be reintroduced. We have surges of historic reintroduction of saffron for quite different reasons. Edward III, when he wanted the wool to develop into a cloth trade, encouraged dyeing, and saffron then became one of the big dyes.
By the 19th century, British saffron was in decline. It was labour-intensive, and the expanding empire sucked in ever more spices. Caroline's the only commercial grower of saffron left in Britain, and she does it on a very small scale. In saffron's English heyday, it was grown in the hot, dry soils of Essex, Norfolk and Suffolk, not wet old Wales.
When we started growing it in 85, we didn't know how to grow it. We've got rather nasty clay soil here, and it prefers a chalky, sandy soil. But we've added quite a bit of sand and compost. Yeah, it likes a very hot summer and then a drop in soil temperature to trigger flowering.
Harvesting saffron is so delicate that it's almost always done by hand. So what happens to the red stigmas next? What do we do with those?
Take a flower and gather together the 3, and then you get the end and you see how far you can pull it down the stem.
Oh, okay.
And we've got to dry them. The whole secret of turning, this is called wet saffron, into hay, which is the spice, is in the drying. And there are as many ways of drying saffron as there are of picking it, probably.
It's a painstaking process, but when a spice costs £4,000 a kilo, it's worth it. I got a bit daunted by the fact that you need 150 crocuses to produce just 1 gram, but actually 1 gram is a lot of saffron, isn't it?
Well, 1 gram is between 450 and 500 threads.
Yeah.
And if you're having between 10 and 20 threads a pinch, you're going to get between 20 to 40 meals out of that, aren't you?
Out of 1 gram only.
Yes. Yeah. It is very good value because you only need a very little bit of it.
Do you like the taste of saffron?
Yes, I do. It's more a sensation than a taste. When you eat something with saffron, to me it's like a very good wine, and you suddenly feel a lift at the back of your palate. You think, I like that.
But what I really like is the colour.
Yes, it's a beautiful clear yellow, isn't it? There's no colour like saffron yellow, sunlight yellow.
I'm heading east, following the routes of the drovers who walked Welsh meat to market.
We're now approaching a true drover's road over this terrific piece of mountainside.
Where it says, I notice unsuitable for motor vehicles.
That's right.
Idris Evans, a droving historian, is taking me up into the hills. These tracks through the valleys kept the drove from mixing with other livestock along the way, but drovers also forged their own paths through the mountains.
They didn't like to pay tolls because it was costing them extra money.
So are we dodging toll roads?
Dodging tolls, that's right. Very often they had to divert around the toll houses, which in fact was a problem because it cost them extra time. They'd worked out a system of an average speed of about 2 miles per hour.
And then were there dangers of bandits up there?
Of course. Highwaymen were waiting for them. They knew they were carrying money. Cattle rustlers, they were all around here.
You could sort of see a bandit coming, more or less.
That's right.
For example, I don't think there are any now.
No, I hope not. I hope not.
Many of the roads that cut through the mountains and valleys today started life as drovers' tracks. In other places, these trails have all but disappeared. A lone bridge stands stranded, the ghost of a droving route and trade long since gone.
And this bridge is...
The other very interesting thing is, when we were wading through that water, if we hadn't got our modern wellies, we'd have got wet. Problem with feet. So they greased their feet before they ever started with pig fat. This acted like an oil in an engine. Because there was no friction, no blisters, no pain.
So they walked 300 miles with their feet in lard, sliding around inside their shoes.
Pig fat, known in Welsh as bloneg. What a lovely name, bloneg.
Bloneg.
Yes, the best of the pig fat.
They get up in the morning, put on their pants,
put it on their feet,
put on their bloneg.
That's it.
Once on the road, the drovers would try and keep their hundreds of cattle organised.
The head drover would have gone on about half an hour ahead. Normally ringing a bell and shouting 2 words. Hi-tree-ho!
What does that mean?
Nobody knows. Really? Nobody really understands. Whether the cattle understood it, nobody knows.
And is he going back and shouting it to the
He would just be warning people that he was coming through.
So it's like Dolph was shouting 4.
That's right. They needed to communicate at all times. Obviously they hadn't got any mobile phones. They did this.
So these whistles you're doing, they had meanings?
Oh yes.
So you've got these hundreds and hundreds of cattle crossing and the sound of whistling and shouting. So if we carry on in this direction, do we have to shout something before we go?
Well, advisable, just in case.
Because I would hate people to be surprised. Can you give them a...
Hi-tree-ho! We're going to give them a whistle as well.
Looming large over this landscape are the dark peaks and crags of Snowdonia. In recent years, they've become an adventure playground for climbers and hikers. But for archaeologist Alex Langlands, this wild landscape has far older tales to tell.
This is an absolutely awesome landscape, it really is. It's harsh out here. You've got thin soils, and then it's boggy right down in the valley bottoms. But actually, if you look just a little closer, you can see all the signs of a working landscape. Because all around here, you've got these long, sinuous walls.
Before the hikers came, this was the land of the sheep farmer. And it still is.
That is textbook glacial valley, isn't it?
It is talked about as a glacial valley, but for me it's home, isn't it?
Gwyn Thomas shares his farm with 500,000 visitors a year. He also shares it with around 300 purebred Welsh mountain sheep. Like the shepherds who've worked the valleys before him, Gwyn is producing the best quality meat he can from the land that he has. Sheep are one of the few animals that can use the whole mountain, and Gwyn farms the landscape in harmony with the seasons.
Spring, the animals are down the bottom here in the spring. They've been down all winter. The middle part of the farm is called the Frydd. The Frydd, yeah. Sheep would have been lambing in April. They'd move up into the middle part of the Frydd.
Because the temperature's rising, so the grass is growing a bit further up the mountain, right?
Then the sheep would move up to the mountain.
Okay.
And that's where they'd stay over the summer.
Today, winter is approaching, and Gwyn is bringing the sheep down from the top of the mountain.
She goes.
Is the dog running up that?
She's running up that side now.
That's a cliff.
Yeah. Back yonder!
What did you say there?
Look back. Back
In
yonder.
Welsh?
Back yonder. Because we work 2 and 3 dogs together.
Yeah.
We give them different commands.
Right.
One in Welsh, one in English, and one in all kinds of language.
Gwyn's sheep belong to the landscape as much as to him.
The sheep are all making their way along that road over there. They seem to know where they're going here, Gwyn.
Yes, they've been gathered that way for probably hundreds of years, you know.
Right.
And because these sheep are hefted to this particular farm...
So when you say hefted, what do you mean by that?
The ewe lambs have been taken up onto the mountain by their mothers. They all know where to graze and where their grazing is on that particular mountain.
It's like a knowledge, the knowledge that your parents gave you,
yes.
That's constantly being handed down through generations of sheep.
Yeah. And you lose the hefting.
Yeah.
And it's a huge task then to get the sheep back to stay on that particular part of the mountain.
So that's really precious to you?
Oh, hefting is very, very important for the upland farms, you know?
Yes. What's the rationale then behind some of these walls I can see up?
Well, that wall at the top there is a boundary wall. That wall is very, very old. It was built by the French prisoners of war during the Napoleonic Wars. If you took your sheep up on the mountain in spring and the wall wasn't there, they'd come down again.
Ah, I see.
So it's just to keep them up on the mountain area.
So this all allows you, on your own, just with your dog, your hefted sheep, to work this landscape.
Yes, very, very simple. Right now.
The Welsh Mountain breed is a true upland sheep, small, nimble, and able to make the best of these rocky slopes.
Lie down, behind your wife. Lie down, lie down!
There's a bit of a disagreement here about who knows best, I think, between dog and shepherd.
Come by!
When the sheep are gathered, it's a chance to give them a quick once-over.
And you've got 3 vans in here?
There's 3 with this small group. Just have a check, see how things are.
The sheep are pretty good at taking care of themselves, but nonetheless, Gwyn has to keep tabs on them.
What I am wondering about, though, I mean, although we've got some walls here, they're pretty light-footed, these characters. You know, if they do run into someone else's land, how do you go about identifying them?
What's unique for us here is that we have an ear notch, or notches, several different notches in the ears of the sheep that are specific to this particular farm.
Farmers like Gwyn make holes and notches in the ears of their sheep, an ancient system of identification.
I've got a whole book here with all the local ear marks, and this is done by hand.
Oh my word. Have you got your farm in here, do you know?
Yes, it's there.
And you're doing this by the notches, not by...
Yes, not by what's written down there, and just the notches. Oh, there we are. Blind and Ants.
Oh yes, yeah.
And to the right here, off the left here.
Top of the left ear there.
Top, and in the middle, you have a hole.
That is absolutely amazing.
The cuts have been made so that if you alter the notches at all, you couldn't cheat.
Someone could tell. This is an absolutely superb system, this.
Yes.
These sheep will stay together through the winter. The lambs that are born next spring will go on to learn the flock's hefting for the future. It's a cycle that's been going on in these valleys for centuries. Shepherds and their sheep have shaped this working landscape, and they're still putting food on the table.
Come on, you do this. You're the expert. Now, this is what is this? This is lamb, then. One of your lambs, is it?
This is not lamb. This is mutton. 3 years old.
Okay.
A hocket, a male that's been castrated.
Yeah.
My father especially preferred mutton to lamb. You try it. Try it.
Okay. Oh, that is nice.
Gwyn has worked to return the traditional balance of farming to the valley, but he's one of the last remaining shepherds here.
Same landscape, same animals.
Same animals, but a lot less people, really. Is it a lonely place now?
No, we have 500,000 visitors coming to the upper part of the farm.
Yeah.
So really it's not lonely. It's different now. And what I can't get my head around is when I come off the mountain in the morning and all these visitors are going up to climb, nobody will say hello to you. I say good morning and they look at me as if I've got two heads, you know.
It's just amazing, really. And you're clearly passionate, not just about farming, but the landscape as well.
Well, keep on trying, don't you? Survival. It's built into us in the mountains here, you know. Yeah. Eat your food, it's getting cold.
The drovers had to make their way through these mountains. Travelling at around 2 miles an hour, it could take just over 2 weeks to reach the Midlands. Idris and I have got as far as the village of Llanarmon Dyffryn Ceiriog. It stands at what was once the junction of several key droving routes, and would have been a welcome sight for weary herdsmen and their cattle.
See, from here we can see sort of 10 white cattle and 4 sheep. Presumably there have been times in the 17th century, and to look down, it would have been incredibly noisy and smelly and steaming, like the car park of a modern service station, steaming with cattle.
In fact, those fields would probably, if you look down from here, you'd probably see a sea of black, because there could be hundreds of animals at this stage, almost like the Wild West of its day.
Drovers would stop to graze their cattle in the lush fields on the valley floor. They'd also take the opportunity to visit the local blacksmith.
Here in my hand, do you know what these are? Have a good look.
Earrings.
Good guess, but not so. Those were the shoes that were put on the cattle, so they would fit those.
They really shoe cattle?
They are, known as queues, cattle queues. These would have been made over the winter months by blacksmiths, farriers, families that had set up around the area.
It's one for each half of the hoof.
That's right, it's a cloven hoof, so you had to have 8 of these per animal.
It really is not unlike a service station in that you roll in, drop your cattle off to eat and be shoed, and then you go for a...
Well, that's right, it was an...
Yeah, you're allowed to drink and drove.
Of course.
That was all right, was it?
Drovers used to meet at this inn, called the West Arms, in the 16th century. Idris has called ahead and asked the chef, Grant Williams, to fix me up with some drover's tucker. Apparently, an 18th century head drover would have started his meal with oatcakes and buttermilk, followed by mutton and leek cowl, a kind of traditional Welsh stew.
This is amazing, this thing. I've decided on the basis of this bowl alone that Welsh cuisine is infinitely better than French.
Very good, excellent.
And for dessert, toasted cheese. Drovers brought with them money, trade and news. The first reports of British victory at the Battle of Waterloo were carried to Wales by the drovers. These were trusted men with an important job to do.
I think we should toast the drovers.
Oh, so do I. Cheers.
Cheers.
The story of North Wales isn't just about farming. People had to get everything they needed from this beautiful and elemental landscape. Alice Fowler is venturing to the very edge of Wales in search of a truly wild prize. A fish that can live both in fresh and salt water.
On a clear day you can see all the way to Snowdon, and it's a remarkable view, a sort of land of counterpane, of patchwork. And down below there is the Dyfi Valley, and in the Dovey Valley runs a pristine river. The waters of the Dovey are rich fishing territory, and prince among these fish is the suan. This is the Welsh name for a sea trout. The suan is hard to catch, but that's not its only secret. Nigel Milner is a fishery scientist working at Bangor University, and he's going to show me that not all trout are the same.
One more sea trout.
He's brought along two fish, a brown trout and a suan, or sea trout.
So this is a sea trout, but she's also known here as a suan, right?
It is. In Wales they're called suan. Suan is sort of a characteristic, iconic fish of West Wales. Right. These fish are exactly the same species, but one of them has stayed in the river, that's the brown trout.
With all the spots.
With all the spots. And the other one has gone to sea as a sea trout, and it's just come back to the river, and it's taken on this really silvery coloration, which is an adaptation to let it survive in the sea.
I mean, clearly they're two different fish, but they were exactly the same beginning.
Exactly the same beginning. They come from the same eggs, the same parents, but some make a decision to go to sea, and they can feed on sand eels and sprat, and they grow large very quickly. And they come back as big fat females with lots of eggs.
There may be more food, but there's also a lot more predators in the sea.
Absolutely, and that's the interesting aspect of this from the biologist's point of view. There's a strategy here to be adopted. To go to sea or not is a huge trade-off, a huge risk, huge decision for the fish to make.
For most fish, the change from salt to freshwater at the estuary mouth is an invisible barrier. But the suan isn't most fish. It can choose to live in the sea and then come back to spawn in the river. If I'm going to catch one, I'm going to need some help. Traditionally, you fish for suan at night. They're so precious that licenses on the Dovey are strictly controlled. A season license will only be granted if you were born within 4 miles of the river, which luckily my tutor Ictid was.
Go. Nearly, right? Nearly. There we are.
He's been catching suan for almost 50 years, and it's taught him patience. It takes a lifetime to do that, so I think I'm just going to spend the rest of the evening flailing about.
I managed to tie a knot.
We dress warmly for the night ahead and pick our flies carefully, because a suan's mind isn't on its stomach.
What we have to remember is these fish don't actually feed in fresh water.
Right.
Once they've passed the juvenile stage and they've gone to sea, they come back purely to spawn. So the type of flies that we use are a little bit gaudy. Does that make sense?
Yes, you do.
Yes.
This was the river the suan were born in, but their time at sea has made them wary. Not interested in feeding, they lie in the deep pools by day, venturing out to search for spawning partners under the cover of darkness. The slightest torchlight near the river will scare them away, so our camera switches to night vision.
That fish behind me just leaped. It's this very meditative state where you and the river and the hope of a fish. And there is something very poetic about that. I've yet to quite find the poetry in motion there. Have you caught something? I've heard this leap and a plop. There's no fish in this river. It's a big lie.
Around 1 a.m, the clouds clear and a bright moon comes out. I'm delighted to be able to see the riverbanks again, but for Ictid, it's a bad omen.
What I've noticed is, since the moon really came up, that in itself is deadly for fishing for sea trout at night.
Oh, thank you.
But of course, fishermen are great for making excuses.
We give up. Ictid brings from his car a brown trout he was going to have me compare my suan with, but my suan is still in the river. Fortunately, he caught one yesterday and he's willing to share.
compare the taste now of the sea trout with the brown trout.
Which should I go first for?
I'll try the brown trout first because I want you to see which one you...
The brown trout is delicious. But the suan is in a league of its own. Oh my god, it's just... Oh yeah, that is just amazing. The difference is huge, isn't it? It's the flavour of more life experience, of a fish that's become bigger, stronger, tastier food by going to sea. This really is the most delicious fish. Oh, you can taste it, it's been somewhere. Then you know it's had an adventure.
With a little bit of Wales.
It is a rather big bit of Wales, actually.
Yeah.
I'm nearing the end of my journey through North Wales. Professor Richard Moore Collier is an expert on the droving way of life, and I'm meeting him where the Welsh drovers would have caught their first glimpse of English pastures.
What a wonderful, typically Welsh view it is.
Well, it is a typically Welsh view because it's a typically Welsh sort of day.
I would have to take your word for it that is England. I mean, it's just...
Behind us lie the mountains of North Wales, and in the mist before us sit the border town of Oswestry and the lush plains of the Midlands.
So by this time, the cattle would begin to smell that rather splendid grass that was growing down there in England.
So what's so great about that grass?
Well, we have to remember that in the years before, I suppose, the mid-1930s, people just thought grass grew. It was sort of God-given herb that grew every year and you just got on with it.
I thought that too, I must be right.
The problem, of course, as far as Wales was concerned, that the natural occurring grasses which grew were growing essentially on acid soils. Much of Wales was acidic, it was wet. The quality of the grass that grew there was sufficient to grow cattle to what we call store condition, but it really wasn't quite good enough to fatten them. Whereas across there, once you get into England, the climate, the soil type were such to produce grass which was capable of fattening cattle.
Only just across the border into England, Oswestry is a true market town. They've been holding a market here every Wednesday since 1190. Sheep and cattle from both sides of the border are brought here to be sold. And there's one breed that looks very familiar.
Is that a Welsh Black? Look, it's Welsh Black.
What we have here is farmers bringing their cattle to market to be sold. Whereas 150 years ago, I mean, most of the cattle would be sold by farmers from their farms directly to drovers.
And that is a thing that just still happens.
It still happens today, yes. In parts of Wales now, because of the improved quality of grassland, of course, a lot of animals can be fattened. But still, a lot of farmers, particularly on the more remote hill and upland farms, produce store cattle for sale for fattening elsewhere.
When they drove them, did they come back a lot scrawnier than that?
After they'd been driven for 3 weeks, possibly from Anglesey or from Carnarvonshire or West Wales somewhere, they would have been very, very considerably leaner than this one, yes, without question.
And these ones have basically had a big breakfast and then got in a car?
Well, I don't know whether they had a big breakfast, but they've certainly got into a lorry.
Obviously things have changed an enormous amount, but is there any similarity between the sorts of people you'd have found here 100 years ago and this lot?
The one thing about these men, they will have probably had a bacon and egg breakfast and a cup of coffee, whereas most of your average Welsh drovers would have breakfasted on strong beer and possibly a little bacon fat, so they'd have been probably a little bit more animated than these guys.
Really? Would they have all been a bit drunk by the time they came along?
Well, they might have had the odd one or two, yeah.
In the 17th century, it was reported that 3,000 cattle a year were walked from Anglesey to England. By the 18th century, this number had trebled. The Industrial Revolution increased demand for meat in the cities, but it also brought with it a new form of transport. The coming of the railways in the mid-19th century meant meat could be moved cheaply and, above all, quickly.
So really the advent of the railways really put play to the drovers?
To a very large extent, it certainly put paid to long-distance droving. On the other hand, of course, local droving would still be required because you've got to get the cattle from the farms to the railhead to the market.
The symbiosis between man and beast living together and slowly moving through the landscape, that was the thing that slowly petered away.
I think that petered away, yes, pretty well by the 1860s, 1870s, that had largely gone.
Over time, the railways also fell from favour. Oswestry's train station was once a hub for livestock. Now, it's being restored as a museum. Today, all cattle movements are restricted and licensed. Animals are transported directly from field to farm to market by road. They're very well looked after, of course, but it's different.
It's all a long way, really, from back in Anglesey with Reverend Richards and with Idrissa. It was coming over the water and into Wales, and we talked about life being lived at the pace of the cattle, a symbiosis between man and nature. Then the railways came, everything got mechanised and speeded up, and suddenly here it's all about the trucks and the lorries and the traffic and the cars and the metal cages and hundreds of cattle being driven through, and we're not living at their pace anymore, we're making them live at ours.
This market is all that's left of a trade that helped shape North Wales and its food. This is a part of the country defined by nature and harnessed with sheer hard graft, a land carved out by people like the drovers. Next time, we're exploring Kent, the Garden of England, on the doorstep of Europe.
I have to say that I don't think I've ever seen anything that looks less like this.
That's eel, lad. It's eel.
Sex, Power and Religion, a new series strips away centuries of male domination to reveal the goddesses. Divine Woman next. And riddles even further back in time for BBC4. Meet the Professor rewriting evolutionary history in Beautiful Minds.